They thought she was just another visitor, so they kicked her out of her own boardroom. But 60 seconds later, they'd learned the truth. She wasn't just the boss, she was their boss. And by the end of that minute, their careers were over. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Excuse me, ma'am. This meeting is for executives only. Please wait outside. Those were the first words Olivia Grant heard as she stepped into the gleaming, glass-walled boardroom of a Fortune 500 company she now owned. She paused in the doorway, her hand still resting on the polished steel handle. The air inside was cool and faintly scented with expensive cologne and fresh coffee. At the far end of the massive mahogany table, a group of sharply dressed men shuffled papers, adjusted cufflinks, and pretended to focus on their laptops. Olivia, tall, poised, and wearing an elegant navy pantsuit tailored to perfection, had arrived 15 minutes early. She liked to observe people before they knew who she was. It revealed more truth than any resume. But before she could even say her name, 3 men seated nearest the head of the table glanced up at her. They didn't look impressed. The chief operating officer, a broad-shouldered man with silver hair and a watch that cost more than most people's cars, gave her the kind of dismissive smile reserved for waitstaff who've refilled a glass without being asked. He leaned back in his chair and tilted his head toward the door. "This is a private meeting," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We'll let you know when the real CEO arrives." The real CEO was standing right in front of him. Olivia didn't flinch. She scanned the table, taking in every reaction. A few of the executives looked curious, as if trying to place her. Others shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze entirely. But no one, not one person, corrected him. Her skin prickled under their stares. She could see it in their eyes. The assumption that a black woman in this space must be an assistant, a caterer, or perhaps someone who had wandered into the wrong room. In their world, power did not look like her. Olivia had faced this before, too many times to count. And over the years, she had learned that the best way to dismantle arrogance was not with an immediate retort, but with patience and precision. So she simply smiled, her expression calm, almost serene. "All right," she said softly. "I'll wait outside." She stepped backward, the soft click of her heels on the marble floor echoing in the sudden hush. As she pulled the door closed, she caught a glimpse of the COO smirking at his colleagues, no doubt congratulating himself for keeping order in his domain. Outside in the corridor, Olivia stood still for a moment, letting the hum of the building fill her ears. Her reflection stared back at her from the wall-to-ceiling glass. A woman who had clawed her way up from a one-bedroom apartment over a laundromat to running one of the largest holding companies in the nation. A woman who had negotiated billion-dollar deals in rooms filled with men who underestimated her before she even spoke. This company, the one she had quietly acquired just last month, was no different. The ink on the deal was barely dry, and already she had been given a perfect example of why the culture here needed a shake-up. She could have barged back in, slammed the paperwork on the table, and announced her title. But that wasn't her style. No, she preferred to let arrogance ripen into overconfidence, just long enough for the fall to sting. From her position outside, she could see the men through the tinted glass. They were leaning toward one another, whispering, no doubt speculating about who she was and why she had walked in. A secretary? A PR rep? Maybe some junior staffer sent to fetch coffee? She waited. She checked her watch. Exactly 60 seconds passed. Then she opened the door again, this time with a firm, deliberate push that made it swing wide enough to startle a few of them. Every head turned. Olivia stepped inside, her stride steady, her presence commanding the room in a way that made even the COO's smirk falter. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Power, she knew, was best displayed in control, not volume. She stopped at the head of the table, resting her manicured hands on the polished wood. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice smooth but with a steel edge, "allow me to introduce myself. I'm Olivia Grant. As of last month, I own this company." The silence was absolute. Someone shifted in their chair. Another cleared his throat. The COO's face drained of color, his jaw tightening as though he'd just bitten into something sour. Olivia's gaze swept the room, making deliberate eye contact with each man. "I came here today to meet my senior management team," she continued, "but it seems I've already learned something about how some of you operate." She let the words hang in the air. The weight of them was heavier than any raised voice could have been. In that moment, she wasn't just the real CEO. She was the reminder that assumptions could be costly. And in her boardroom, respect wasn't optional. Olivia stepped into the hallway, the glass door whispering shut behind her. Her heels clicked against the marble floor in a measured rhythm, each step as deliberate as her breathing. To anyone passing by, she looked composed, unshaken. But inside, her thoughts burned hot, like coals beneath a calm surface. It wasn't that they didn't know her face. She didn't expect them to. She'd only acquired the company weeks ago, and she had intentionally kept a low profile. No, what lit the fire in her chest was that they didn't even consider the possibility that she could be in charge. In their minds, a black woman walking into that boardroom couldn't be anything more than an outsider. And that assumption, that casual, reflexive dismissal, was the rot she had seen in too many corporate cultures. It wasn't just offensive, it was dangerous. Dangerous because it meant these men were making decisions through the lens of prejudice, and that kind of thinking could poison a company from the inside out. She stopped in the middle of the corridor. Sunlight streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting her shadow across the polished floor. Without hesitating, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. The contact she needed was right at the top. Evelyn, personal assistant. Olivia pressed the name, and within 2 rings, a warm but professional voice answered. "Evelyn," Olivia said, her tone crisp and controlled. "Bring me the personnel files for every executive in that boardroom." Now, there was the faintest pause on the other end. Evelyn had worked with Olivia for years. She knew the difference between frustration and fury, between a bad meeting and a moment when her boss was about to make history. "Yes, ma'am," Evelyn replied. "Anything else?" "Yes," Olivia said, her eyes narrowing slightly as she turned back toward the glass walls of the boardroom, watching the men inside talk among themselves as if nothing had happened. "Tell security I'll need them here in 10 minutes. And make sure they're ready to escort people out if necessary." The tone in Olivia's voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight Evelyn knew well, the kind of weight that meant someone's career was about to end. As she hung up, Olivia slipped the phone back in her bag. She moved to a nearby bench along the hallway wall, sitting down not because she needed rest, but because she wanted a vantage point. From here, she could see the door to the boardroom clearly. Her mind ticked through the possibilities. Would they realize who she was when she walked back in? Would they try to recover, to smooth it over with awkward laughter and forced politeness? She hoped they would, because it would make the contrast between their arrogance and their groveling even sharper. But this wasn't just about ego. Olivia had built her empire by surrounding herself with talent, not titles. She had no patience for leaders who led with bias instead of vision. If they couldn't see past their own narrow views in a first meeting, what other opportunities were they blind to? What innovations had they dismissed? What employees had they overlooked because they didn't fit their picture of leadership? She could already imagine the ripple effect this moment would have. The story would travel down the hallways, into emails, into quiet whispers over coffee breaks. She walked in, they told her to wait outside, and 60 seconds later. And when people told it, they would either speak with awe or with fear. Both were fine with her. 5 minutes later, Evelyn appeared at the far end of the hall, walking quickly in heels that tapped out their own rhythm against the marble. She was carrying a sleek black folder, thick with printed documents, and had an expression that said she knew exactly what kind of storm was about to break. "Here you go," Evelyn said, handing over the folder. "All the files you asked for, and security is on standby." Olivia accepted it with a small nod, flipping open the cover. Inside were the profiles of every man in that room. Names, positions, performance histories, even their hiring dates. She read quickly, absorbing the information. It was a habit she had honed over years of high-stakes negotiations. Know exactly who you're dealing with before you make a move. One file caught her eye, then another. Patterns began to emerge, patterns she did not like. She closed the folder, her decision crystallizing in her mind. The COO's smirk from earlier flashed through her thoughts. She could almost hear his voice again, dripping with condescension. We'll let you know when the real CEO arrives. Olivia rose from the bench, the folder in one hand, her other hand smoothing the front of her blazer. Her heartbeat was steady now, her earlier anger distilled into something sharper. Purpose. 10 minutes had passed. It was time to re-enter the boardroom. And when she did, they would know exactly who the real CEO was. Exactly 60 seconds later, Olivia pushed the boardroom door open again, this time without hesitation. The polished brass handle gave way under her steady grip, and the room's chatter spilled out into the hallway. Inside, the men had already resumed their meeting. Their voices overlapped, a mess of corporate jargon and self-importance. Discussions of quarterly profits, market share, improving public image, as if that could be done with nothing more than a press release and a stage photo. No one noticed her reentry at first. She didn't announce herself. She didn't clear her throat. She simply walked forward, each step deliberate, the echo of her heels tapping against the hardwood table's base. When she reached the head of the table, her seat, she placed a sleek black folder on the polished surface with a quiet, final-sounding thud. That sound made heads turn. The COO looked up from his notes, his brow knitting in irritation. His voice was sharp but dismissive, the same tone he'd used before. "Ma'am, we told you." Olivia didn't let him finish. She cut him off with a voice as calm as it was cold. "No," she said. "You told me to wait outside." She leaned forward just slightly, letting the pause linger. Her gaze locked on his, unblinking. "But you," she continued, her tone like the snap of a closing door, "are the ones who should start packing your things." The room froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. A few men glanced at each other, confusion flickering across their faces. Someone muttered under their breath, "Wait, what?" Olivia reached into the folder and began pulling out documents, her movements precise, methodical. She laid them out in a neat line, each paper facing the recipient. "My name is Olivia Grant," she said, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the room. "As of last month, I'm the sole owner and CEO of this company." She let that sink in. "I bought out your previous chairman, who retired. And I came here today to meet the leadership team, to see what kind of people were steering my investment." Her gaze swept the table slowly, pausing on each man who had looked at her earlier like she didn't belong. "What I witnessed," she said, "told me more about this company's leadership culture than any financial report could." She tapped the folder. "So I've decided on my first act as CEO." Olivia flipped open the top document. Her voice remained steady, almost conversational, which somehow made the impact worse. "Termination letters. Effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a bell tolling. The COO's face went pale. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "We've been here for years. And in that time," Olivia interrupted, "you've clearly built an environment where arrogance thrives and talent is overlooked. I have no interest in keeping people at the top who make decisions through bias instead of vision." Another man, the CFO, leaned forward, his voice shaky but urgent. "Ms. Grant, this is a misunderstanding. If we'd known who you were." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "If you'd known, you'd have treated me differently?" She let the question hang, heavy with implication. That's exactly the problem. Silence followed. Some executives avoided her eyes entirely, staring down at the table. Others looked stunned, as if the ground had just shifted beneath them. She continued, "Leadership isn't about who you expect to see in the room. It's about recognizing potential, respecting people, and making decisions based on merit, not skin color, gender, or whether someone matches your mental picture of authority." Olivia slid the papers closer to their intended recipients. "Security is outside. You'll be escorted to gather your belongings and leave the premises within the hour. Your severance packages have been calculated according to your contracts." The COO's lips parted as if to argue, but the words never came. Instead, he sat back, a defeated look replacing his earlier smugness. Olivia straightened, resting her hands lightly on the table. Her voice softened, but her authority didn't. "This company will change," she said. "It will become a place where the best ideas win, not the loudest voices. Where leadership looks like anyone capable of earning it. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, they're free to find somewhere else to work." With that, she closed the black folder, the soft click of its clasp sounding almost like a period at the end of a sentence. The room remained silent as she turned and walked toward the door. She didn't glance back. She didn't need to. Outside, two security officers in crisp uniforms were already waiting, their posture professional but firm. As Olivia stepped out, they moved in to carry out her orders. Behind her, chairs scraped back, papers rustled, and voices dropped to hurried whispers. In less than an hour, the boardroom would look very different, and the message would be crystal clear. Olivia's heels clicked once more against the marble floor as she walked away, her expression calm, her mission already shifting to the work ahead. Because for her, this was just the beginning. Gasps erupted around the table, sharp and audible, like the collective sound of air being sucked from a room. The COO's face drained of color. A moment ago, he'd been leaning back in his chair with the relaxed arrogance of a man who believed the space belonged to him. Now, he sat rigid, his fingers tightening around the armrests as if they might anchor him in place. You can't fire us like this," he stammered, his voice cracking halfway through. Olivia didn't flinch. She met his gaze with a calm that was far more unnerving than anger. "Oh, I can," she replied, her voice smooth but carrying the kind of steel that cut through any room. She straightened, letting her presence fill the space before she continued. "You've all violated the company's core values: respect, integrity, inclusion. They're not just words on a wall or slogans in an annual report. They're the foundation of how we operate. And if you can't show basic respect to a stranger walking into this room, you don't belong in leadership." A ripple of unease moved around the table. One of the executives, a man in his late 40s with a neatly trimmed beard, cleared his throat. "We didn't mean anything by it. That's the problem," Olivia said, cutting him off sharply. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "You didn't even realize it. And if you can't see your bias, you can't lead a diverse, global workforce." Her words landed heavily, and a few of the remaining executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Olivia didn't give them time to formulate a defense. She had seen this scene play out before. Excuses layered over blind spots, polite denial wrapped around harmful assumptions. But in her boardroom, those patterns would not take root. At that moment, the door opened quietly, and two members of security stepped inside. Both were dressed in dark suits, their posture professional, their expressions unreadable. Olivia turned slightly toward them, her face still composed, and gave a single nod toward the men seated before her. "Escort them out," she said. "Their access badges will no longer work." The officers moved with quiet efficiency, stepping to the sides of the COO and the others whose names were written on the termination letters. The shuffle of chairs echoed through the stillness as they stood, some with indignation, others with visible shock. The COO, now visibly rattled, muttered something under his breath that Olivia didn't bother to acknowledge. Another executive opened his mouth, as if to argue, but one glance from Olivia stopped him cold. As they were led toward the door, the contrast in reactions among the remaining board members was stark. Some sat wide-eyed, their shock playing. Others kept their expressions carefully neutral, wary of being noticed. But a few, just a few, allowed the corners of their mouths to twitch into faint, almost imperceptible smiles. Those small expressions told Olivia everything she needed to know. There were people here who had been waiting for this moment, even if they hadn't dared to imagine it. When the door closed behind the departing executives, the air in the room shifted. It was still heavy, but different, charged with the realization that the power dynamics in this company had just been rewritten. Olivia let the silence linger for several seconds, her eyes scanning the table. "Let me be clear," she said finally. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of tone that made every word stick. This is not about ego. This is about the kind of culture we build here. The people in this room are responsible for shaping how every employee, from the intern to the senior manager, experiences this company. She stepped back to the head of the table, resting her hands lightly on the polished wood. We are a global business. Our teams, our customers, our partners, they come from every background, every walk of life. And if our leadership can't reflect that in how we think and act, then we are failing before we even start. No one dared to interrupt her. Olivia's gaze softened slightly, but her words stayed firm. I expect more from the people who sit at this table. I expect you to lead with humility, to listen more than you speak, and to challenge your own assumptions before they cost us talent, innovation, and reputation. She straightened, her presence commanding yet composed. If that makes you uncomfortable, you have a choice: adapt or step aside. Because under my leadership, comfort will never come before progress. The weight of her words settled over the room like a new law etched into stone. For a brief moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then, slowly, pens began to scratch notes and laptops clicked open. The remaining board members understood. The company was under new leadership, and the tone had been set. Olivia closed the black folder and placed it at her side. This was only day one, but the message was clear. Respect wasn't a suggestion here. It was the standard. An hour later, the same boardroom that had once felt like a cold, unwelcoming space was transformed. The long table had been pushed to one side, rows of chairs arranged to face a small podium at the front. Every seat was filled. Department heads sat alongside junior managers, administrative assistants, engineers, marketing coordinators, staff from every corner of the company. Some stood along the walls, arms folded, curious about the sudden meeting called by their new CEO. Word had spread quickly about what had happened earlier, but no one knew the full story. The air buzzed with quiet speculation. Olivia Grant stood behind the podium, her hands resting lightly on its edges. She looked over the room. Hundreds of faces, some wary, some hopeful, some still unsure about her. She wasn't here to impress them with flashy promises. She was here to set the tone for everything that would follow. What happened next, she continued, is something I think you all deserve to hear. Not because I want to embarrass anyone, but because I want to be honest about the culture we're going to build here. She told them exactly what had happened. How 3 senior executives, men who had been in the company for years, had looked at her and assumed she didn't belong. How they had told her to wait outside while they began their meeting. She didn't embellish the details, nor did she let anger creep into her tone. She simply told the truth. I was dressed in a navy pantsuit, she said, and I walked into the room with confidence. But because of what I looked like, my gender, my skin color, they assumed I wasn't in charge. They assumed I was in the wrong place. The room was silent. I'm not here to embarrass them, she said, but I am here to make something clear. This company will be led by people who treat everyone with respect, whether they're wearing a 3-piece suit or a janitor's uniform. Because talent, intelligence, and leadership have no skin color, no gender, and no dress code. There was a murmur of agreement from somewhere in the back, and then stillness again as her words sank in. Some of you, Olivia continued, have probably felt invisible in your roles. Maybe you've been overlooked for promotions. Maybe your ideas have been ignored until someone else repeated them. Maybe you've been underestimated, just like I was this morning. She took a step away from the podium, her voice warming but still resolute. That ends today. If you're here because you have skills, ideas, and value to bring. And if you want to grow, this company will give you the space to do it. Not based on who you remind someone of, but based on what you're capable of achieving. The first sound of applause began in the middle rows. It was small at first, but grew as others joined in. Within seconds, it became a standing ovation. Olivia didn't bask in it. She nodded once in acknowledgement, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, but she kept her focus forward. This wasn't about her. It was about the shift happening in the room. For the employees who had always felt they had to work twice as hard to be noticed, it was a moment of validation. For those who had felt unseen, It was a moment of visibility. And for those in leadership positions, it was a warning. The rules had changed. When the applause finally quieted, Olivia stepped back to the podium. One last thing she said. Respect isn't given to the title you hold. It's given to the person you are. The minute you forget that, you lose the right to lead. She let that linger in the air. Now, she added, her tone lightening just slightly, let's get back to work together. The crowd began to disperse, some in quiet conversation, others with renewed energy in their steps. There was a sense that something had shifted permanently, even for those who hadn't yet realized the full weight of it. As Olivia left the boardroom, she passed by the glass door where, just an hour earlier, she'd been told to wait outside. She smiled to herself. That single minute had been enough to change the course of the company and the careers of everyone in it. Because in leadership, she knew, true authority came not from a title printed on a business card, but from the respect you earned when you walked into the room and proved you belonged. And Olivia Grant had just made sure no one in her company would ever forget it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Your support means the world to me. And remember, every story holds a lesson worth keeping.